Welcome to another episode of the Digital Transformation Age podcast, and I have a difficulty coming up with short names for podcasts, but there you go. This is the podcast where we look at the transformation that affects us all, the digital one. You can't hide it. You can't run from it. You can't ignore it. There's just no way around it. And for this episode, I am talking to I should have come up with a couple of those names, but I think Tom Webster is very good at that. I should have listened to that one before, but fellow podcaster of the Marketing Companion, something that should be noted, Mark W. Schaefer. Welcome, and thank you.
I'm delighted to be here.
Well, thanks you
for having me.
It's my pleasure. Trust me. I've started working on the introduction, and I'm guessing that this is probably gonna be my longest introduction of guests. So I'm quoting your Twitter bio: chieftain of the blog Grow, social media bouncer, consultant. Yeah, well, there you go. Consultant, educator, author of 5 best-selling books, including Social Media Explained and The Content Code, which is the last one. Others are Ch.2 of Twitter, Return on Influence, Born to Blog, which you wrote with Stanford Smith, also an extremely nice blog. The revised version of the Ch.2 of Twitter, and then Social Media Explained and The Content Code. And we'll talk about the Content Code later on a little bit more. You are also, I think, the only person that I know personally who has a Wikipedia page. Well, that's something.
Interesting.
There you go. It's a nice one. There are no bad things there, so that's good. You are a educator too. Currently, you're teaching at the Rutgers University School of Business. Mm-hmm. You're doing the social media. How do you call it? Social media course marketing. Social media marketing.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So we can pretty much make the assumption that you know what you're talking about when it comes to social media and marketing online in this digital age.
That's a big assumption.
It's a big assumption. Well, we're gonna.
I'm a student just like everybody else.
Hey, that's because it constantly changes, right? I mean, there's no way of saying what's going to be interesting tomorrow. I think the content code also digs into that, into the highly changeable nature of the online world, of the digital world, the speed at which it changes, and constantly everybody trying to catch up with it. It's so difficult to get ahead of the game. You're one of the few, or one of the people that really tries to stay in touch with the latest. I think your community is also one that does that, which helps you. Your guest bloggers on Grow, for instance, are people who really try and stay continuously at the top of the game. Mm-hmm. In the opening of Content Code, the question was asked, how is it that I do everything that I need to do, yet I don't get to get the coverage that I want? And there's just this one little quote, and it says, because you're living in yesterday's world. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of people who still do that. And talking about...
I see that everywhere. Even at very, very large companies, and I have to apologize to your audience in advance. I've had a cold. I've been sick for the last few days, so my voice isn't very strong. But I see this everywhere, which is the reason I wrote the book. That this idea of digital transformation, it's not stagnant. You don't transform once. So if you're just catching up to social media, you're behind. If you're just catching up to content marketing, you're behind. You might be 2 years behind or 3 years behind. If you're still playing by the rules of what might have worked just a few years ago. Excuse me. So that was the idea behind the book, because I see this everywhere that that businesses are, they think they're doing their best, they think they're on the cutting edge, and they're already 2 years behind. And so I wrote the content code to kind of force this thinking in a new way, to say, look at the world we're in today. If you think you're playing by these rules today, you've got to change. And here's what we need to do to change for the next few years.
Yes, exactly. So my earlier encounters with social business, which was totally focused on the way we do business and the way we connect uh, within a business, but also with people online, clients, um, taught me that the catching up game is something that is so intense. It's so continuous. I mean, it changes so fast that it's sometimes very difficult to do, and you can't do it on your own. Um, and obviously, with marketing, it's the same thing. So, how did you experience the introduction of digital in your personal life? Because when you read content code, you start with newspapers, magazines, TV, and then digital happens.
Well, I guess you could say I was really one of the pioneers in the digital space. Before I went out on my own, I worked for a big metals and mining company, a global company called Alcoa. And I was the global director of e-business there. And we had digital marketing, CRM, social media, and we were working on different projects all around the world. So we had some of the first digital customer interfaces in our industry in countries like China and Russia and Brazil. So one of my employees caught up to me recently and wrote me an email, and he said, "Do you realize how far ahead we were of our time?" And that created a competitive advantage for us at the time. But of course, those things that we were doing then seem pretty rudimentary today. So I was always um, looking at this in a very practical way, in a very rational way about how do we use these tools. As you say, you can't keep up with everything. And so you have to make the right decisions. You have to be able to assess quickly and look at things through a filter of business success, and then either implement and move on. That's a key skill set today.
It's something with the with new platforms that pop up all the time. Uh, when I was more, like a couple of years ago, well, it's already like 9 years, 8 years ago, when there were new things coming around the corner all the time, and you'd sign up, and then you spend your time on it, and then it withers away, and you lose your interest, you lose your time. For companies, it's the same thing. I mean, there are new things pop up all the time, and always the question is, do you jump on it? Like Pinterest, for instance.
Yeah.
Do you jump on it, or you're gonna let it be and wait until if it grows or not, and then jump on? When
Well,
are you too late?
it I think it depends on your business model. I mean, I recently wrote a blog post talking about how to calm down and not be overwhelmed by the social media change. And one of the things I pointed to was, if you look at the most popular places where companies invest on social media today, they're Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, maybe Instagram, and Pinterest. So those are probably the same places businesses invested a year ago, with the exception of maybe Instagram. Maybe that's the same set that you would invest in 2 years ago. So the fact is, most of these shiny new things don't work. Most of them fade away.
Hmm.
And so if you're a small company or even if you're a big company with limited resources, I think it's a very viable strategy to let others experiment and figure it out, if something catches on. Now, there are some exceptions. I recently attended a very good lecture at Columbia University, and I got to meet people from some of the biggest media platforms in the world, like the BBC and Associated Press and CNN. And these are businesses that are vitally interested in finding new ways to spread their stories. So they're experimenting very, very aggressively with every type of new channel to see if they can get an edge with some audience in distributing their stories. So again, it depends on your business model. But I think for most businesses that I work with, it's perfectly okay to wait for others to figure it out and then adopt effectively after that.
So it's just let them figure it out, see if it is actually catching on, and then instead of jumping on early, you jump on a little bit later, but you do it right. So you figure out your strategy, because if you jump on early, there's not a real strategy that you can grab hold of, because you don't know what the strategy is going to be, because the platform has to settle first. Once it's settled, then you can figure out a good strategy. Then you can jump on and you can do it well. You can do it properly. Interesting. In your line of work, how dominant is thinking digital first, thinking digital in because one of my arguments is that people are using digital platforms, but they're not thinking digital platforms. How dominant is it in your line of work where digital thinking should be predominant?
That's a very complicated question
Great.
because um, the problem is that people think digitally, they know they need to move digitally, but organizationally, they're not prepared for it. So, what does digital thinking mean? Um, it means connecting in new ways. It means building relationships in new ways. It means creating commerce in new ways. It might mean just something as simple as um, how do people use Twitter today? Um, it might be to complain. They might be registering complaints about your business or your dealership or your airline or whatever. This has profound organizational implications.
Yeah.
People expect an answer within an hour. So now is that digital? We need to overhaul our organization. Think about regulated industries, something that I work with a lot of pharmaceutical companies. I work with a lot of businesses in the insurance and wealth management industries. And they always say, well, you don't understand. You don't understand. We're regulated. And my point is to these companies, you've got to figure it out. You've got to step up and
Yeah.
figure it out. And it's not the digital transformation is not digital, it's human.
Yeah,
You've got to
true.
get the human elements in place first. So I have this friend that's the CMO of a wealth management company. And okay, well, they're regulated here in America by the Securities and Exchange Commission. They have to be careful about what they publish. They hired a lawyer who approves their content within 1 hour.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. Now,
Instead of a department that takes 2 days or something.
yeah. So I mean, so to win in this world, you've got to, it's not really so much about the digital strategy, it's about the organizational strategy, it's
Right.
about the company culture. If
Right.
you're not a company willing to be open and communicate and maybe even take your hits every once in a while, you've got to get that part of your company in order first before start opening yourself up to the world on Facebook. It's going to be a disaster.
Mm.
So really, before you conquer a digital strategy, you've got to have a human strategy in place and be ready, or you're just going to be checking a box.
Is it right in the same context where there are plenty of businesses that see what's happening out there, realize that they have to be a part of it, uh, just for the sake of getting somebody's attention, and then focusing a lot of effort onto it, but forget the human element, and then run into all sorts of problems because they don't have that human element installed, if you will, within the
Oh,
company.
sure. That's the number one issue. I mean, you can get technology to do whatever you want.
Yeah, exactly.
Technology is the easy part. It's getting the people to do what you want that's hard.
Yeah, exactly.
And so that's where you really need to spend your time. The trick isn't chasing the next shiny red ball to see should we be on Blab or should we be on Kick or should we be on Snapchat. Um, Maybe you're lucky enough you're in an organization and you're prepared for that. But what I see in at least most of the big companies that I work with is that a lot of transformation needs to take place in the culture and the
Mm.
organization to really take advantage of this. I mean, anybody can check a box. They can throw some YouTube videos up there and say, okay, we're digital.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
But
you're not.
but you're not.
Yeah,
Yeah, you're not. It
no.
has to start with the culture and the leadership and the direction of the company. The digital transformation is really one of the heart of the company, of the DNA of the company.
Mm. So it's the same thing that I discussed with others like years ago when we were talking about social business, where you realize that the times that we're in are changing rapidly. Everything changes quicker and quicker, and because of globalization, there can something happen. Well, in Paris or whatever, that has an effect on your business on the other side of the ocean, where you know 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that would not have an effect like so directly. So creating a social business in the sense of an interconnected between individuals with an open format where innovation and ideas are cultured and nourished and those kind of things. This goes for marketing as well, where you create a business which can, if they choose, if we talk about the Red Bull, if they can choose to chase the Red Bull whenever they want. And if it doesn't work out, they can just switch to another ball, to the next ball, or whatever, because
Mm-hmm,
they have that culture. And
mm-hmm,
with companies who don't have that culture, it's very difficult. Once they set, at the beginning of the year, they're going to allocate a certain budget to follow the Red Bull, and that's it. And if it doesn't work out, it's going to take maybe to the end of the year when they have to shift budgets again to realize that, well, that didn't work. Now we're going to chase another ball and spend another year or half a year or whatever trying to figure that one out.
mm-hmm,
And then they'll be always be running behind the changes that are taking place so very rapidly.
mm-hmm. That's a great comment, and you just gave me a great idea for a blog post
There you go. Write it down.
because I think there are different levels of readiness, and I think there are different levels of competition in industries
Mm.
that would help dictate how aggressive you are as far as social media and the digital transformation. What I observe in many industries, is that there's still a lethargy. Um, People are kind of checking the box, um, especially in regulated industries. They're kind of checking the box and they're saying, okay, well, we're on Facebook now, we're safe. We'll post pictures of puppies and everyone will be happy. But once a competitor breaks out of the box and really starts optimizing, then that raises the level,
Mm,
raises the level of urgency and
mm,
raises the heat really,
mm.
significantly. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting way to think about it.
It's a point where other companies, because I assume many companies observe the motions of other companies in order to get an idea of what's going on.
Right.
And if they adapt to the 21st century as a company and they got it right, where they have the flexibility to do whatever it is that they want. And another company says, well, they're very successful now on that platform. We see that's happening. So that must have, you know, an effect on their bottom line. So we need to do that as well. So they'll jump on that platform and then read a blog post or two about how you publish something on that platform and then call it a day, instead of going back to that fundamental humanism that they have to change the core and then jump on that platform.
Hmm.
So talking about that, then how significant, and this is like a little bit more of a philosophical question, which I like. How significant do you believe this digital transformation is for, well, mankind as a whole, and you as an individual?
Hmm. Well, this is a very philosophical question. Um, I think what we're what we're seeing now, in a very broad perspective, not just a business perspective, the digital transformation. I mean, you could argue that this is, I can't think of a more significant um, development in the history of the world,
Oh, there you
other
go.
than
Yeah.
other than maybe the rise of major religions or something like that. Um, if you think about how ISIS and other terrorist groups are working in the world today, it would be impossible for them to do this 10 years ago or 15 years ago. So the nature of terrorism, the nature of war, the nature of business, the nature of relationships, basically are all hinged on this digital thread that runs throughout our lives now. And it's perilous because as the internet grows and our dependence on the internet grows, our vulnerability grows as well.
Yeah, true.
So we talk about the Internet of Things and having our homes connected, our automobiles connected,
Our front door locks
uh,
connected.
even our bodies
Mm.
connected. Well, who wants to have a house that you got to reboot your house? I mean, really, who wants a car you can hack into or a body you can hack into? Um, so I think one of the things that concerns me is what I call the malignant complexity of the digital world, is that nobody really understands how the internet works
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
nobody understands the unintended consequences of some of these actions. And a concern I have is that, I mean, when you and I were starting in business, we would have a business plan, and we would maybe test it, and we would try to get customers and build a business. Well, today it's so easy to create code. You can create an entirely new business in a 24-hour hackathon. And what I hear so often is when you talk to these people just creating code, and throwing it out there, they don't know how it's going to work. They don't know if it's going to work. They haven't thought through the consequences. They're saying, let's put it out there and see what happens. And that's an amazing, wonderful opportunity.
Sure.
But it's also there's some dangerous things in that too, because we just don't understand how. Nobody really understands how the internet works today. And as the world becomes more complex, there's more holes, there's more vulnerabilities, there's more ways to get hacked. And so that's going to be, I think we're moving, we're at a crossroads, I think, in our world in a way where we're moving from this bright-eyed world of endless opportunity with the internet, and we're crossing the line into, oh my gosh, what have we done? These terrorists are doing what with our information? These hackers are doing what with our credit card bills, credit card numbers? Um, this person did what with with government secrets, and that's just going to increase. We've seen a huge shift in the last 12 to 18 months where we see more companies being hacked, being hacked, being hacked. I worked with a company recently that they work on products for U.S. defense contracts, and they were hacked by a foreign government. Some of their trade secrets were stolen, blueprints were stolen. The entire inbox of the CEO was stolen.
Oh.
So the company, and this never became public.
No, of course not.
So the company went to the security experts and they said, well, what do we do? And they said, to really build the barriers to keep hackers, to do the best we can, we've got to take your entire company down. We have to take the entire network down for 8 days. And the company said, well, we simply can't do that. So they came up with a compromise where, in the middle of the night on a holiday weekend, they took the company down for like 8 hours to make some fixes. And here's what the security company said, is that there's no way to stop these hackers. We won't even know that something's going on until they're already in. Now, this is one example of one company.
Yeah.
But and we've heard high profile hacking things from Google and from the IRS and from different retail operations. That's just a fraction of what's really going on. I think I heard, it was Ted Koppel, American journalist, has a new book that talks about how foreign governments have already hacked into the American electrical grid. And they could have taken it down, but the timing just wasn't right.
Okay.
So, I mean, so this is all part of digital transformation too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I hate to be a downer about it. I'm a optimistic person, but I think I'm also a realistic person.
Exactly.
That we're kind of crossing the line now between just
Well,
joyful. The sky is the limit.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my gosh, what have we done?
Yeah. I think I'm on the same page as you on this, because at one end we have all the joys that it brings. I mean, I haven't gotten around to buying content code, for instance, and I've done it like an hour and a half ago, and I just click it once on Amazon, and I open my Kindle on my laptop and it's there. I mean, if you talk about the joys of the digital transformation age, that is definitely one of them. You know,
Yeah.
that instant access to, in this particular case, great content.
Right.
And right,
The
and
best.
well,
The
you can
best.
say the best content,
It's the
and but that's
best.
absolutely a thing, right? And then there's so much going on, and the blatant ignorance of almost everybody who uses the internet, that sends the emails and posts the pictures of the grumpy cat,
Yeah.
and uh, most of them have no idea. I mean, we're talking about encryption, but we don't really know what it means. You know, we're talking about opening backdoors to encryption. We don't know actually what it means if that happens, and all these consequences, and not just on what the bad guys do, but the intentions of the good guys also. We don't know, and so yeah, that's definitely, there's a dark side to it. Um, then again, you know, when the industrial age came along, it also had a dark side. When we started using the fossil fuels very efficiently, that had a dark side. Um, all these kind of things always have invariably a dark side to them.
Mhm. Yeah.
And the only thing that we can hope, I guess, is that in the long run, if people like you keep doing their work, keep doing that positive thing with the digital transformation, that in the end, that will prevail over the other darker side of it. We can now say that the industrial age, what it has given us now, you know, when we are a generation, 2, 3 generations past, with the first people that were laid off because they building factories, or the people that were, you know, grinding on the conveyor belt and those kind of things. We now have settled on a way where where we can deal with these kind of factories, at least in the Western world. I mean, if you see the new factories from Tesla, for instance, I mean, they're almost a joy to work in, and you're working on building a car. They're not comparable to the first conveyor belt that the Model T was built on, for instance. So we can
Well,
only hope that
the,
in the long run.
yeah, the big difference is that these industries um, became safe. They became more productive. They became more energy efficient. They became more environmentally friendly,
Mm.
largely through regulation.
Yeah, true. Yeah,
The
sure.
internet generally is not regulated
No.
in most countries. And in the United States, it's been simply a disaster. Um, the government tried to regulate something 2 years ago to protect intellectual property. And what became apparent is that the people leading our government have no idea how the internet works.
Mm.
And some of the people who are freewheeling on the internet really don't understand the importance of intellectual property. And so the thing just crashed. And it became a lesson that this is a this is a fast changing area.
Yeah,
It's a
exactly.
dangerous area to try to regulate. It's fraught with peril. But there's going to be a point where the internet is going to have to be regulated. There are going to have to be standards. There are going to have to be laws um, that there's going to have to be some way that I mean I think we're struggling with this right now is the same things that protect our privacy and our communications also protect terrorists, and that's unfathomable. So what's going to give?
It's very difficult to find that particular balance,
Hmm.
with people fighting on both ends of the spectrum. Very
Hmm.
hard. One to keep it open, one to close it down,
Hmm.
and obviously there has to be a balance in the middle at some point. I think we're still very far away from actually finding that balance. but that's a discussion for another time, I guess. And it's a very difficult one. It's something that we're not going to solve anyway. So yeah, it's and that's a point that you made. It's the speed at which it changes. I just mentioned the industrial age, but that took decades upon decades in order to make a significant change within society. Everything on the internet happens so fast. We're not even talking about years anymore. We're talking about weeks or months or sometimes even days where things totally change overnight. If it's only the public opinion on a certain point. And legislation just has a very difficult time keeping up with that. Mm-hmm. It has been having a difficult time keeping up with that from the beginning, like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when they started to be aware of that. And yes, that's definitely something that they need to get a handle on. And yeah, I can only hope that the human element will also find a way to balance itself out, which is still, I mean, yeah, it's one of those posts on your blog too. It's already an old one, but the way that women are treated, for instance, on Twitter or on social media, which is just appalling, and it's a step down from the humanism that we already had, and now we're degrading that again, and it has to be built up again on the other end, and it's going to take time in order to do that, a lot of time probably, which is sad. Okay, I don't have any more questions, so let's try and finish this on a high note.
Yeah.
Because this is, yeah, I asked the question, so I'm gonna have to live with that. No, I really do, because I really feel that the positive is something that we can talk about endlessly, but the negative, the darker side of these kind of things need to be addressed too, and people need to be aware of that. So anybody who listens to this has to, do some research for their own on these things. I mean, it's just like with genetic modified food, GMOs. We don't know in the long run what kind of an effect it's going to have, and we do need to know these kind of things, and we need to figure it out.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for
Yes.
having me today, and I am optimistic, and I think
Yes.
we could leave it on this optimistic note that, a lot of people who are struggling, trying to figure out digital transformation, that's why I wrote the content code. And I start the first chapter of the book. It says, this is a book of hope.
Exactly.
Because if you're being overwhelmed by all the changes, by all the implications of exploding information density, this is a path forward. And there are ideas and suggestions in the book for companies of every size and every budget. So that's something we can end with that's positive.
I like that one. Yes. And that's it. I will say goodbye to you. I'll say goodbye to my listeners. They can subscribe, leave a note on iTunes or anything else, and connect with me on any platform. Thank you so much, Mark, for having your time, even when you're sick. I really do appreciate. You're a great guest.
Thank you.
And thank you so much, and goodbye.